What's up, guys? In March, we're going to have the SAT, and in the morning, people come and get loaner Chromebooks if they don't have theirs or theirs isn't working perfectly. They sign up, and then at the end of the day, I need to track them down to get those loaners back, and I'd like to automate that. The problem is I can't test it because the data doesn't exist. I don't know who signed up in what rooms until the morning. So in order to test it beforehand, we're going to make some fake data. Part 1, fake names, numbers, teachers, and rooms. Part 2, we're going to tweak them to have things we specifically want to test for, like maybe accent marks, two-part names, typos, that kind of thing. And then part 3, we're going to look for the connection where a student can point you to the room, or a room can point to the students within. So today we're going to generate a bunch of names, not look too deeply into them, just make sure we got the raw material to work with. We're going to start by getting the faker package using a requirements.txt and just putting in the word faker. This will let CodeHS look for them on the PyPI database and install what we need. So I'm also going to put import, if I could type, faker, and when I run, even though it's not going to do anything, you'll still see the installation and the prep. You might see some progress bars, or if you've already installed it recently, it might say, hey, we've still got it. Now we create a little faker object. This is a popular idea that's been used in PHP and Ruby and Java and other things. So the faker methods and setup are pretty deep and complicated. You start with an object, so I'm going to say fake equals, I think it's called faker with a capital F, and then we can test it by going fake.name. This will give us a name, but it can also do addresses, emails, phone numbers, IPs, all kinds of things. So let's test it out and see Ryan Salazar. If I run it again, we'd get a different name and see how it goes. Every once in a while they throw in a doctor or a junior or other things, but it's a pretty low rate. Most of the time it's just a first and a last. So let's say, hey, I want some students. Students equals fake.name, and we'll get 100. On the day, it'll probably be around that much. I'd say between 50 and 100 loaners that we have to give out and then track down at the end. So let's do that and then print students just to see a bunch all at once. Okay, yeah, most of them are just first and last. If I ran this a couple times, we'd see a little bit of variation, maybe a DDS after one of them, or here's an MD, and so on. So let's do the same thing for teachers because they're also going to have names. And in fact, let's also do 100, even though we probably won't have that many. We'll probably be testing in like 30 rooms or something. So there's the teachers, even though I didn't print it. We are getting the same kind of thing every time. Now let's say, okay, the students are going to have IDs because we're going to look them up, if we can, by the ID. That prevents any issue regarding nicknames, if they're John on one list but Johnny on another. It prevents any issue with, hey, I've got a two-part last name, and in one version it has a hyphen and one it has a space. And most of all, it prevents duplicates. If we have two Haley Adams, then we can distinguish them by their ID. So let's say student IDs equals, and then the faker package has a numerify method that'll give you some numbers where you could enter like some kind of pattern, like, you know, blah blah blah, hashes, and the hashes will be replaced with numbers. But in this case, I'm gonna just go 6 numbers, and of course there will be the same amount because we're gonna line them up with the students. We could make like a little student object, a little class, and then it has these attributes, and maybe we will, but first let's just test it out. Oh. Let's see how that goes. When I typed it, it didn't save my typing because it was running at the same time. So there we go, we got some numbers. Great, beautiful. They're strings, they're not really numbers, but that's what we want because IDs aren't the kind of things you do math on. So there's a letterify or lexify method that will give you letters, and if you want both, guess what? It's called bothify. So I'm going to go room numbers is fake.bothify, and the room number pattern in our building is a letter, which is a question mark, and then 3 numbers. So let's try that. And again, we could make a little teacher object that has a name, maybe separated into first and last, maybe also give them a room number attribute. But for now, we'll just make separate lists and zip them when we need it. We'll say rooms, let's print that, give it a gander. And of course, they don't have to be real. For example, the IDs will occasionally start with 0, and in real life, our IDs never start with 0, but that's fine, we'll look them up just the same. And these room numbers, well, oops, in real life, our room numbers never start with Z, but that's fine, we get the idea. I do want to change one element, which is the case. It looks weird to have some upper and some lower, so I'm just going to put dot upper, and that's just the Python dot upper. It's not a fake package method. There might be one, right, on the bothify. If I looked into the documentation, maybe there's a way to check, oh, you can ask for specifically uppercase, but I'm just using Python string methods because I know it. I type a couple letters, it's fine. So that looks nice. Great. Let's write these to a file so we can open them up later, and that'll be the end for today. So I'm going to go, actually, at the end, we'll print done, just so whenever we do our writing, we'll see an output over here instead of having to check the file first. So I'm going to go with open. With is our context manager that's going to handle errors and close the file even if we can't. And then let's make something called students. In order to read, that's all you need, but in order to write or do other things, you need a separate parameter. So W is for write, and the tradition is to just call it F. If we open a file and we're going to do something right away, we'll just call it F, and that's easy enough to type. So I'm going to go f.write, and then we're going to say, okay, zip the students and the IDs, so they're going to be in pairs, like the first student and the first ID, the second student and the second ID, etc. So let's see, I'm going to go, this is going to be separate lines, so I'm going to go new line dot join, and then inside of here we'll do like a single line and then roll them all up, join them together. So I'm going to go student, and then I think it'd be nice to put a tab in between them. If that looks weird, we can always change it, but having a tab in between them is consistent and everyone will have the same pattern. Student ID. I'm not just calling them ID because ID is a built-in name in Python. It's like a function that gives you their unique address, I think. So I don't want to step on their toes. So, well, that's it. And then we go for student, comma, student ID, and zip, and then we zip those two together. Probably a lot of parentheses are needed because we're closing the write, closing the join, closing the zip. I think that looks reasonable. Let's run it. And, you know, there's a high chance of mistakes, but that's fine, it'll tell me. And then we'll take a look at the file. Whenever you open a name that doesn't exist, it'll go ahead and create one, no problem. Hey, it says done, so I didn't get any errors, and I think when it does that creation step, it skips over to show you on Code.hs. That looks nice. We got names and numbers, and the tabs are usually aligned, but if you have a long name, it'll be tabbed over to the next cycle, and that's fine. This isn't meant to be visually beautiful, it's just meant to have some kind of separator. When we read this later, we can say, hey, take off the tab, and that's your split target. When I get these in real life, when we do the SAT, it'll probably be read from a Google Sheet in CSV form or something similar. So that looks good. Let's do it for the other, which is going to be pretty much the same. So I'll copy, and probably the most dangerous thing is copy pasting and just hoping you change it right. But we'll see. Okay, teacher, and then room for teacher, comma room, in zip, teachers and rooms. Okay, so zip takes two sequences, could be list, tuple, generators, whatever, and zips them like a zipper with the first of each, the second of each, the third of each, all the way down. And when one of them runs out, the whole thing stops. If they're unequal, then you don't have any errors or anything. It just runs out when it runs out. So let's try that. Again, high chance of mistake, especially when you copy paste, but that's no problem. It'll tell us, or we'll notice. This is overwriting the students we had, by the way. It's going to write 100 new ones in that file. That's fine, they weren't precious. I'm waiting for that done to appear, because we put that print done at the end, and now we know. Okay, so we got teachers with room numbers, and they look good. There's one with a second in there, and that's a good thing to practice. In our next step, we'll say, hey, do we want titles? Do we want juniors? Do we want the third? Do we want hyphenated names? And the answer is, well, it depends. We want some of those, because when I look through the students, there are definitely hyphenated names, but there probably aren't any dentists, so we don't need to look for those. When I look through the teachers, there are definitely people who use their middle name, so we might want to look for some middle initials or something, but I don't think we're going to have any who insist on a specific medical title, for example. So that'll be the next step. We look for a few things we want to test for and introduce maybe like a 5% error rate or something. Then the third step will be connecting it, so you look up a student and find where they are, or look up a teacher and find who's with them. There you go.